Leading us devotion this morning is Dr. Jeffrey Jew. Jeff, as we call him, is the managing director, trauma healing here at American Bible Society, and he joined us in November 2011. And I'm a student of history, so I love history. So I went online, and this is what I found about Jeff. Formerly, he was a provost and executive vice president, Westminster Theological Seminary, around here in Philadelphia. He was also a professor of history. I like him, Westminster Theological Seminary, and a professor of historical and systematic theology, Reformed Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. But more important, look at the membership. He's a member of American Historical Association, American Society for Church History, and American Academy of Religion. But lastly, most important, and that's why he's leading devotion, he's ordained within the Presbyterian Church in USA. So we welcome Jeff.
Good morning. If you have a Bible with you, would you turn this morning with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 12? And let me read from verse 7 to 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 to 10. Hear now the reading of God's word. So to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelation, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger from Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecution, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This morning, I want to share with you what I think is at the heart of what we hope for in our various ministries. And I think if we were to whittle it all down to one basic emphasis, we want to see transformation. Transformation in individual lives, transformation in families, transformation in churches, transformation in communities, transformation in our countries, and ultimately, transformation in the world. But how do we accomplish that? How do we reach transformation? On one hand, you can look at the world's wisdom, and you can see how the world attempts to accomplish transformation through power, strength, all on display. Just look at the news. Whether we're talking about politics and government, business, or otherwise, we see people who want to make transformation in their different sectors, in their worlds, in their countries. And how do they do that? By asserting their own strength, their own power. On the political sphere, I was reminded of a visit I had to China, and this was shortly after President Obama had been elected, and he was making his first visit to China. My wife and I were visiting, and there was a youth student of mine who was working in China, and we were having lunch with him one day, and he said to me, watch what's happening this week. It's very, very interesting. Normally, when a U.S. president comes to visit China, the government will do something like release some political prisoners, some human rights activists, to show good faith toward America in partnership. He said, watch this week, Jeff. The Chinese government will release no one. The Chinese government has decided now that they are an equal superpower. Therefore, the Chinese government, we do not have to show any deference to the United States president's visit, and they did not release anyone that week. Displays of strength, displays of power, China wanting to transform the world and show that they now are a superpower on the geopolitical landscape. We see it in business as well, do we not? Displays of power and strength. At one point, I was helping to run a Christian bookstore, and it was so hard to survive against Amazon. Look at the world around us, right? Where are the bookstores? Where are the Barnes and Nobles? Where are the Borders? All gone, pretty much, as Amazon has demonstrated its resources, its power, its ingenuity to knock out every other business and bring about a transformation to how we do retail shopping today. Transformation in power and strength. And I would say that that method of change is not unique in the secular world, and in fact, the church is not immune to it either. That within the church, we see those who want to bring about change, but use those same methods of strength and power as they try to achieve their goals. I say this because in my own experience, I participated in those same methods, even while in ministry. Baraka read to you my background. Some of you know my story. And it is one in which, no question, even in ministry, I thought my own strength, my own power could achieve results. 20 years ago, when I became a seminary professor, I was listed as one of the youngest seminary professors amongst evangelical seminaries in America. I thought I had arrived. I climbed up the ladder in the school all the way up into leadership, serving as provost and executive vice president, thinking again that my accomplishments, my smarts, my abilities, my gifts could all bring about significant change, not realizing that underneath it all is pride. Pride in what I thought I could do out of my own strength. And it got so bad that my pride even led me to think that I could hide and manage deep sins in my life. Deep sins that the Lord finally decided, no more, Jeff, and ripped it all out. And in doing so, it left me to a point of total despair and dependence on the Lord. To learn this deep lesson that transformation does not come from our own strength and power, but it comes in a different way, a gospel way, a kingdom way that Paul describes in this passage. And I admit to you, it was a hard lesson for me to learn truly how the kingdom advances and transformation happens. These verses then present a different way for us, a kingdom way, a gospel way that I would summarize in 2 points here. That Paul teaches us that moving forward toward transformation comes through 1, suffering, 2, weakness. Let's start first with suffering. Notice how Paul describes his experience here. We do not know exactly what this thorn in the flesh was, but it's clear that it's something that Paul agonized over, that he suffered from to the point where he asked the Lord, take this away from me. And he did it 3 times. Take this suffering away. Take this pain away. Have you ever reached that point of deep suffering? To the point where you sit day after day looking at your watch, waiting for the day to end because you want the pain to stop. Crying out for the Lord, stop, stop, make it stop. I've felt that before. That deep heart pain, crying out, Lord, just make it stop. But listen to God's response to Paul in his suffering. He says, my grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. He doesn't say, I'm just going to take it away from you now. I will stop it because you say so, because you're hurting. He says, my grace is sufficient. Suffering is not in vain. And I greatly appreciate how the authors of Healing the Wounds of Trauma speak about how God uses suffering to purify our faith, to turn evil into good, and to bring us comfort that we may comfort others. Is not that God's grace sufficient for those who suffer? And at the same time, we realize that in our suffering, we are not alone. Did not our Savior pray in the midst of his own suffering, "Take this cup from me"? And he knows our suffering. He has experienced that suffering. And he knows what it feels like to cry out to the Father, "Make it stop." All the while knowing his grace is sufficient. And so that the way of the kingdom, the way toward transformation in this upside down kingdom, is to recognize that God does use the suffering that you and I experience, that others experience, for his good will. At the same time, Paul describes not just suffering, but he describes weakness. That transformation will come not through our own strength, but through our weaknesses. And what does that mean? What does it mean to move in our weaknesses? Because if you're like me, and I would imagine many of us are the same, we don't like to show our weaknesses. We don't like to talk about our weaknesses. We don't want other people to know what we struggle with, what we are experiencing in our weakness. In fact, we'd rather hide them. We'd rather pretend that they are not there. We'd rather ignore them instead of confront our weaknesses and recognize that they are there. I've wondered, just in my short time here at ABS, why aren't more churches interested in trauma healing ministry? Why is it that you would think this is the obvious place that would care about trauma healing, and the churches don't always seem so open to wanting to talk about trauma healing? And I would admit, having been a church leader, we don't want to admit our weaknesses. We don't want to admit that our churches have abuse in our communities. We don't want to admit that people suffer with different addictions in our churches, whether they are drugs or pornography or other challenges. We'd rather show the good face of our successful ministries and not talk about our weaknesses. And I would say that is even more the case when we talk about leaders in our churches. They can't show weakness. Not at all. They must be perfect all the time. And yet Paul is teaching us something very opposite to that. That the way to transformation is through weakness. Because weakness, instead of producing pride, produces humility, dependence on God, deep dependence to know his grace is sufficient. And at the same time, when we see our weaknesses and know that they are there and recognize and identify them and confront them, we know that in that is great power. Paul describes here. It is the power of Christ that is unleashed to bring transformation, not through our strength, but just the opposite, through our weakness. What is this power that Paul is talking about, which is the source, really, of the transformation? What is this power? What are we talking about here? What kind of power is this? I'm sure all of you are familiar with the other writings of the Apostle Paul, in which he describes this power. It is the power to raise the dead. It is resurrection power we are talking about here. It is the power that brought Jesus back from the dead. And that same power is here in the presence of weakness to bring about transformation in the lives broken by sin and suffering. This is the power the world does not know. The world cannot grasp, cannot understand, cannot comprehend. But it is the power of the kingdom. And it is the power available to us. Do you sense that in your ministries? Do you know that you have that power there? Do you know that that power is prepared to be unleashed, but not because of your own achievements, not because of your own strength, not because of your own pride and accomplishments, but that power only comes through weakness, through your weaknesses. And again, the irony of it is we don't like to show weakness. We don't want to tell other people about our weaknesses. The churches don't want to talk about weakness. But if we do not show our weaknesses, how will we show the power? The power will be hidden. The power will not be present, for it only comes through weakness, suffering, pain, despair. These are the channels in which God unleashes the gospel power to bring about transformation. And notice what Paul says. Because of that, he boasts in weakness. He boasts in it. And even more than that, he is content with them. Again, I don't know about you, but when I look at suffering and pain, how can someone be content in that? It seems so difficult, impossible even, to go through suffering, pain, and to have this attitude of Paul, that he is content with them. It is a lesson I am still learning, because every fiber in my body wants to run from weakness still, wants to leave pain and suffering, wants to forget it, wants to again show that I can climb a hill on my own strength again. But the lesson that this passage is telling us is no. There's no power in that. There's no transformation that will come from that. It is only through weakness. True resurrection power is strength through weakness. Let me close by encouraging you, brothers and sisters. Do not be discouraged in your labors. The trauma healing ministry is a ministry of weakness. And because it is, we will boast and we will be content in that. For when we are weak, then we are strong. And there is great power here. Power that is being unleashed. And I'm convinced great fruit has already come and more fruit will come as we walk in weakness, as we walk knowing that Christ's power, resurrection power, is there. My prayer for all of you is that you would walk this way. That in whatever successes you see, you will be humble. You will know that it is strength through weakness. And it is our privilege to participate together in this ministry of weakness, knowing that God will greatly bless us as we serve him. Let's pray together this morning. Father, we thank you this day for your word which speaks truth to our lives, which challenges the world and its way of accomplishing transformation, and shows us the gospel path in which we walk in humility and in weakness before the world, boasting in that, content in that, knowing that in that weakness is great power. The power that brought Jesus back from the dead, the power to mend the brokenhearted and bind up the wounds, the power to see true transformation in our communities, because we know that the power of Christ rests on us who walk in weakness. So teach us that this morning, oh God. Remind us of that. Press that upon our hearts as we encourage one another in this work until the day of your return. We thank you and commit ourselves and this day to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. You made it back. Welcome to the second day of our global gathering of the Community of Practice. I hope you had good sleep last night. For those of you on live stream, I hope you had good sleep last night. And some of you, your day is more over than ours, which is just beginning, but thank you for joining us as well. A few announcements for you before we set off. You'll remember to look at your schedules to see where you're headed today, but I want to just give you a couple of updates as well. There will be an office tour at 1 o'clock today. So this is during the lunch time. You'll gather your food, you'll eat quickly, and at 1 o'clock you'll be here by the registration, and there will be people here taking you through the building for a tour. Best to go on a guided tour, not on your own exploration. There is a special lunchtime, informal lunch gathering today for folks interested in trauma healing ministries in South America and Central America. It will be held at our conference room Jerusalem, which is on the 8th floor down the steps, so gather your food as well. Go down the steps, and you'll go down this hallway, and it'll be on your right. But if you don't know, find an Ask Me button person. Notice they did not give me one. I should not be asked anything. You can't trust my answer. But there are a number of people out here as well who will guide you as well. Don't forget as well that there are places if you need to make phone calls. There are on your map, there are a couple places that are phone call rooms. And we also have a prayer and reflection room that you can be guided to as well. During the breaks, especially, there'll be people there who would be happy to pray with and for you. So remember that. I didn't bring up one of those tags, but over there near Nate, where the flowers are, there is a basket. He can hold up a tag. If you're still interested in writing your name and putting some networking ideas, questions that you would like to do, place them there. And tomorrow morning, we will be having a time where we're all working on networking, but this will help guide our time. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to start. Baraka.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Jeff. Next, we have a trauma healing testimony. And to get us into that testimony, I'd like what Jeff, just one from Jeff's devotion this morning. If we do not show our weakness, how shall we show the power of Christ? And to bring us the testimony this morning, we have Nancy Writebol from SIM. And where's Nancy? Over there. So Nancy, this is what I found on Science magazine. Nancy nearly died of Ebola. She became a celebrity after becoming the second American patient to be diagnosed and treated for Ebola. She contracted the disease at the same time she had malaria and spent 17 days at Emory Hospital, Atlanta, in the special isolation unit. She can be credited with bringing a face and urgency to one of the largest and frightening epidemics of our time because of what she went through. But very important, this is what she says. She comes from a family steeped in religious evangelism. Her father was a volunteer firefighter and made humanitarian trips to Haiti when she was growing up. Her parents hosted traveling missionaries in their home. And because of that, that influence and stories, hearing what God did all around the world, she was very influenced to move into ministry. And here we are with Nancy Writebol coming to share the testimony from the SIM ministry. Welcome, Nancy.
good. That's great. Thank you. Good morning. All that he told you is just overrated. It is my privilege to be with you again. I was not able to be here last year, but previously have been here, and it is just a joy to be a part of trauma healing. David and I my husband and I live in Liberia, and we have lived there now for the past almost 6 years. And I just want to share with you this morning of what God is doing in Liberia and through the work of trauma healing. We're talking about families this week, and as they begin to show the slides, what you are going to see is the children's program. Liberia has just grown by leaps and bounds with trauma healing in the adult ministry. Like many of you, we have had request after request to start healing groups and to start training people. And sometimes it's just overwhelming because you can't keep up with the needs and the wants. But this past year, we had the opportunity to train leaders in the children's program. And as we've talked about family this week, I just want to encourage you, if you have not been a part of the children's program, you need to get on board. We trained 12 leaders, and those 12 leaders are involved in children's ministry all the time. But you know, one of the things that I found out was as we were going through the training, I had leaders say to me, you know what? We didn't know that children experienced pain. And as they began to unfold the stories, they realized many times the pain of children is doubled by the effects of what adults have gone through. The children's program is called the Healing Hearts Club. We had 40 children that came to us from the community next to us, and that community is known for its witchcraft, it's known for drugs, and it's known for alcohol, and it's known for not a great place to live. 40 children had been identified by their community leaders that had been through some specific kind of trauma. They came to us, and each of the lessons in the Healing Hearts Club book has a Bible story, it has a real life story, and it helps children to learn how to work through their emotional and through their spiritual pain, and it helps them to learn how to experience God's love for them. I want to tell you the story this morning of one little girl. Her name is Grace, and she came to us, and lesson number 1 in the Healing Hearts Club is I am important to God. This lesson builds on the atmosphere where children are able to feel safe and where they feel that their pain can be shared. Children learn how special they are to God, and that they are individually made and created in God's image. So as the children were gathered around their teacher that morning, and as she was sharing the story, she told the story in Genesis about how God created us and how that each one of us is created in his image. And when he finished creation, God didn't just say it is good, he said it is very, very good. And she shared with the children how important they were to God and how much God loved them and that God had created them. And this little girl, Grace, she went, "Oh!" And the teacher stopped. She said, "Grace, are you okay?" She said, "Oh, no one has ever told me this." And the teacher said, "Yes, it's true, Grace. God does love you, and he has made you, and you are made in his image." She just didn't really know what to do with that. And once again, she said, "Nobody ever told me this." Well, as the week went on, we began to see this little transformation in Grace as she was able to reveal her pain and her hurt. And in the lesson, one of the lessons, there is a part that talks about, have you ever been made fun of? And the children are able to express those deep little pains that they have. And all the little girls in that group pointed at her and said, she has. And the teacher said, well, you're all talking about her, but what about you? And so as they talked to Grace, the teacher looked down. She realized, as one little girl said, yeah, look at her thumb. Her thumb is missing. And as she told the story, she looked and she saw that Grace was holding her hand like this. Half of her thumb was missing. And all of the children had been making fun of her. And so the teacher said to her, Grace, what happened to your thumb? And she said, my ma, she cut it off. And immediately the teacher was just really concerned for this little girl. We pulled her aside and were able to talk to her, and she shared the story with us. And we began to recognize that we really needed to have time with this mom and this guardian. So we went through the rest of the week, and as we went through the rest of the week, we saw Grace just be able to take that pain to the Lord and give it to him. 2 weeks later, we called together all of the leaders and the guardians from that area. We wanted to see how Grace was doing. We wanted to talk to the mom, and we wanted to do it in a non-threatening way because we didn't really know the story behind it all. So we met with the moms and with the guardians, and we asked them, so tell us what your children are telling you about the camp. And all the guardians were very excited, and they said, our kids are playing camp. And we said, they're playing camp? How are they playing camp? Well, they've all taken home their books, their Healing Hearts books, and they've gathered all the children in the community who have not been able to go to camp. And they are teaching their memory verses. They are telling the Bible stories. They are telling the real stories, and they're playing the games and singing the songs, and all the children want to come to camp. Please, will you have another camp? We promised to have another camp for that community. But then we said to the moms and the guardians, we came to find out how the children were doing, but really what we wanted to do was to invite you to come to the adult healing group. Every one of them signed up and came. During that time, we had the opportunity to begin to get to know this particular mom. And we taught the lesson on children and the pain for children. And this mom was one that said, I did not know how much pain our children were carrying. I pulled her aside later and I said to the mom, I said, Grace is really carrying a lot of pain. I said, can you please tell me what happened with her thumb? She said, Nancy, I want you to know this little girl is not my little girl. She was abandoned on my doorstep. And when she was abandoned, she had a blue bag wrapped around her thumb. And when we took the blue bag off around her thumb, the thumb fell off. Because of the circulation that blue bag. I said to her, so what did you do with this little girl? What did you do with Grace? Why do you still have her? She said, we took her to the clinic. We took her to the feeding program, but they could not find the mother who had abandoned this little girl. And she said, Nancy, I could not give that little girl away. So she is my daughter now. I praise God for what he's doing, but I praise God that in the midst of children being healed, we were able to bring those women and guardians into a healing group, and they were able to find healing. I love the fact that these children are out having club. we have no idea what God is really doing. I'm reminded in Scripture that a little one shall lead them. And as they take those lessons out into the community, we may not be out there, but God's Spirit is. And God's Spirit can move in the lives of children. So I would pray for each of you that if you have not explored having the children's program be a part of your program, you need to. I want to encourage you to do that. It looks overwhelming at times, but I'm telling you, the end result is God will take it, multiply it, and use it for His honor and for His glory. I bring you greetings from Liberia, and I thank you for just the opportunity to share with you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. A parting shot, God will take it and multiply. So that's our prayer as we gather here as trauma healing practitioners, organizations, churches, and all that represented here. So we are going to switch and hear from, we have a session, a plenary session, and the topic we are having next is abuse in the home, how the church can help. And to bring us to this topic is Paulette. Baraka is from Rwanda, but currently lives in Bamako, Mali. While in Rwanda, I've visited her in Rwanda at least once, and I visited her. She used to have a counseling practice, counseling and psychological practice. She founded what is called 3H Counseling and Psychological Services. I believe that was the first one in Rwanda. She has 12 years experience as a therapist. Before that, she worked for IJM, International Justice Mission Rwanda, as the director of aftercare. And prior to that, she served as coordinator of Rwanda-based Get Out of Hope nonprofit that provided individual and family group therapy. She has a strong commitment to the protection of vulnerable people, and she's passionate about children and women. Baraka is a member of Trauma Healing Advisory Council. She's been coming for the COP at least, I believe, from the very beginning. This is her 8th. She also partners with the American Association of Christian Counselors, and she's a member of Rwanda Psychological Society. Lastly, she holds a master's in counseling and psychology from Mugema University in Uganda. So Baraka, over to you, and welcome.
Greetings from Rwanda, greetings from Mali, greetings from Africa. And it's true, I can't believe it's now 12 years experience in this profession. And when I met Diana in 2007, and she told us the years she has in this profession of experience, and I was in 1 year of experience, and I couldn't believe how rich where I am. And I'm so happy to learn on her feet and to grow in this profession. And again, it's an answered prayer to see how trauma healing is growing. I think those who are here when we started, I think this room is now becoming small, and this is an answered prayer. We are thankful to God. Abuse in home, and how can church help? There is no way you can talk on trauma and avoid to talk abuse in a home. Because abuse in a home is the same time the roots can cause trauma, and again can be the fruits, can be results of trauma. This is what we are going to catch in this short time. We are going to see the definition and the fact about the domestic abuse, the cycle of abuse, some warning sign of victim and abuser, and why the victims stay in this violence, and available solution challenges in the public justice system, and how can church help. This is a definition which comes in the Home Office that any incident of controlling, coercive, threatening behavior, violence, or abuse between adults who are or have been intimate partners or family members regardless of gender or sexuality. And all this includes the psychological, physical, sexual, financial, harassment, stalking, digital or online abuse. All these are domestic abuse. Domestic abuse remains a hidden issue in our society. And some domestic abuse in home sounds like mythical, like a movie. Yet, it's real, and it's a silent killer. Many women and men in our communities live under fear. They don't have hope to face tomorrow. They exist rather than living. The statistics about domestic abuse are really shocking. Yet, many goes unreported. Those are who had the courage to report, and men are not reported. And those reported, when you see them in the media, they may hit the headline. But it's rare to express about the occurrence of domestic abuse and its effect on home. They limit on story. They don't go beyond to see the effects that leave behind. It's so easy to forget or to minimize the effects of emotional abuse due to lack of visible harm. Yet, wounds of hearts are painful as physical. Many in the church and society have turned blind eyes and blind hearts to the devastation of destruction caused by in-home violence. When you Google the name of Mukeshimana Marie Rose, this is the picture which we found. Rose, a mother of two boys, Pacific and Patient, normally was known as name of Mama Percy because of Pacific and Patient in the village called Nyabisindu Remera in Kigali. When she was just celebrating her 38th anniversary, hoping to have more candles to come, that's when he was killed by her husband. He was killed on 30th October when she was born on 8th October. This is what the abuser said on TV. I saw. He said, we had the conflict for 7 years. You can imagine many things happened in these 7 years. And one night, it just comes in mind to kill her. And I use a table and my hands. This is what the husband did after killing. He just covered her body in a plastic bag and he buried her in a vegetable garden. You can imagine the trauma that Pacific and the patient will have to discover that the vegetable they have been watering is wearing over the body of their beloved mother. This is traumatic. I just want to pause and take a few seconds so that we can honor Rosas in different communities. There are many lives of men and women. There are many children, Pacific and patient, in different communities. I just want to request you to just take a brief as we think and we honor these lives. Thank you. It will not be normal. It's abnormal when this traumatic event doesn't affect Pacific and the patient. What is normal is that they will be affected because this is heavy and traumatic. Research has shown that children who grown up in a violence home have 74% higher likely of becoming also criminal assault. 79% of violent children who have witnessed violence between their parents. You can see now that cycle, how it continues. If nothing done to break this cycle, you can see now what is going to happen in the future. Childhood is regarded as a period of specific protection and right. Children should have the right to develop with a secure and nurturing environment, where the environment is infected with the fear and violence, or the normal task of growing up are likely to be affected. This is a story that we just come out. We finished the classic workshop in Mari. I was with Gineba, and this is a testimony of one of our participants. I gave her name of Blandine. Being a firstborn in Marinke is a tribe in Mari. The parents put a lot of attention on me, very strict, blaming all the time, beaten, over control as the first girl. This created a lot of anger in me. And I get married at early age to try to get peace. When he got married, she was blessed with children. I couldn't understand why I was so abusive to my children. Many times I regret why I beat them seriously. And I was guilty that I may have the evil spirit, which was controlling me. I prayed, I fasted many times, but nothing changed until I went through healing the wounds of trauma workshop. And I understood that this was consequences of my unresolved anger in childhood. There are many people can't understand their behavior. They just see result. They don't know that is effect of trauma from the abuse in home that they face in their childhood. There is what we call honor-based abuse. This is a form of abuse carried out in order to protect what we call honor of the family, where they are forced marriage. This is happening. You can imagine a 14 years old being forced to get married, not even to be the first wife, to the second or the third wife of someone. Female genital mutilation. This is happening. Termination of pregnancy. In Central African Republic, these remain among the top of causes of death of women. Termination of pregnancy is illegal. Yet there are too much abuse, too much violence, sexual abuse, and people end up doing termination, unhealthy termination of pregnancy, abortion, and many lives pass. Women who break the rules are punished to bring a shame upon the family and can be subjected to honor-based punishment for trying to divorce, separate, marry a person in their own choice, having a relationship or marry with a particular tribe or religion. These are examples in Mari, a tribe called Dongo and Bozo. They can never get married. It's like a water and fire. This is in Ghana. I got this in Ghana, that this tribe called Nyokoria and the Alavanyo cannot get married. Being a high educated before married. These are abuses which happen, and the Corp giving honor to family, yet they have effects in short time and in long time. And sometimes the perpetrator and the victim, they may not recognize. They accept this as normal, yet it's not normal. There are always warning sign of victim. Like sudden change in appearance and behavior, avoids contact with church, with friends, with family, try to hide and mask the abuse, cry a lot, being isolated, defend abuse and his action. There is also warning sign of abuser, controlling behavior, unrealistic expectation, blaming others of problem or feelings, sexual violence, verbal abusive, jealous, intimidating personality, history of abusing other partners, riding gender role, hypersensitivity, possessive behavior, push for immediate commitment, lack of empathy, and so on. There is always warning sign, but sometimes people are blind to see. Why do victims stay? Why Rose stay until she loses life? There are some beliefs, like religious belief. There's some beliefs maybe change will happen. Culture, and it's not accepted by the culture. When they pay dowry and then you have to stay because they give a cows, all those are the factors which keep people in abusing environment. Economic factors, when you have 5 children, you depend 100% for this person and you don't have any income, you wonder what to do, and then you decide to stay. Ignorance, life condition, sometimes you don't have even anywhere to go, no family, you are orphans. And love for your children, you think your partner will change and you really love until you lose life. The available solutions is to break the cycle and break the silence. It's not easy, but that's a good way and healthy way to go. The family support, the group support, the safety plan, seek justice, enforce the law against the abuser, perpetrator accountability, when perpetrator punishment to discourage other abusers, aftercare, having safe home, counseling, the community reintegration. There are challenges in public justice. I had the privilege to work with the International Justice Mission for 5 years, and there are challenges in the public justice. It's unfortunate that in many developing countries, the law on domestic abuse are still vague, which most of the time give favor to abuser. And the recent changes in the law means that there is legal recognition of this as an offense. The first penal code in Rwanda just came in 2007. In Mali, in 2011. That means there are even many people who don't have idea on this law. Providing evidence to prove that domestic violence is present most of the time is impossible. Victims fear that the police will not believe them and not be able to prove until they have physical injury. When there is nothing visible, it will be hard to prove. Also, corruption remains a challenge in justice system in developing country. You report someone give something, kitu kidogo, as Nikenya say, and then the person become innocent, yet is not. How can church help? Church need to be equipped in abuse awareness and play a big role in prevention and response. And holistic approach is the best because one aspect affects another. The physical, psychological, spiritual, all those are parts of human beings. And when you focus on one, you miss another one. It will, again, affect and nothing good will come. So partnership is very important within organizations to bring the victim out of dark into the light and give the voice to victim. Silence is permission of acceptance. When you keep quiet, it means you accept. So it's very important for churches to encourage, break the silence and break the cycle. Speak out against domestic abuse and keep the topic alive, not just once, keep the topic alive. Counseling services being available for premarital and marital, even for families. Set up example of compassion and non-violent family. We are missing mentors. We are missing role models. Provide safety environment to victim. Don't ignore abusive behavior. Encourage the abuser to seek professional help because sometimes they are also victim of violence. They need to get help. Guidance to appropriate referrals for intervention. Advocate for justice. October is a worldwide domestic violence awareness. Many people know the sign of against HIV. They know it's red. They know the sign of against of cancer, but few people, they know the sign of against of domestic abuse. And the Health World Organization has set up this, and let us spread awareness of the reality of abuse as integral and a positive way to ending domestic violence. As the body of Christ, domestic abuse needs to gain the recognition that it deserves to make a positive impact. God bless you.
Thank you, Baraka. Thank you for setting the stage for us today to consider the problem of domestic abuse, the problem of abuse in the home. Yesterday, Dr. Langberg reminded us that the purpose of the family was to be in service of the kingdom, right? And so anything that is primarily for service of me, for myself, is moving us towards the DNA of abuse, not the DNA of the kingdom. And Baraka helpfully gave us the definition and some of these examples where we are talking about what does this kind of use for myself look like? Coercion, manipulation, that can be economic, it can be sexual, it can be psychological, right? There's all sorts of ways that we can use to control others, whether adults or children. So thank you, Baraka, for setting the stage. What we are going to do next is take it a little bit further, but get into the practicalities of what can we do. She gave us some good lists of things, keeping the topic alive. right? Finding ways to help people break the cycle, break the silence. But what do we know from healing the wounds of trauma? What is our number one activity that we go over in the lessons? Helping people, right? Listening to their pains, beginning to help them and encourage to tell the story. So that is what we are going to practice today. And so I want to just give you a couple of starts for that. So this is building off of our lessons, one of our lesson 6s, right? To talk about domestic abuse. Baraka already gave you some of these numbers, but they are staggering when you think about them in domestic abuse. In the United States alone, we have 20 victims of domestic abuse a minute, and that's probably a low number. You've heard yesterday, sometimes we say 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 9 men experience domestic abuse. That's what we know. It's probably higher or a lower ratio, right? The impacts, think about this. In the US alone, $8.3 billion are lost every year due to the effects of domestic abuse. That's the economic losses, but if you have lived through domestic abuse, the biggest loss is not money. It's safety and trust. One of the things that we see for victims of domestic abuse is that the potential for it always exists if you live with those who committed it against you. It may not have happened today, it may not happen tomorrow, but it can. And the possibility of it taking place leaves you in a place of terror and unknown future in a way that some other traumas do not. It is always possible. The impact is great. So we are going to move right into what does it require to be a good listener. You'll remember from your training that in order to be a good listener, you have to understand some qualities of a good listener and what your purposes are, right? Because even a good intention can cause harm. A good intention and maybe even good goals without knowing your impact on the other can cause harm. And we're going to give you a little example of that. Why is it that we give people, if you're in an equipping session, you know you did this. You had a 7-minute or a 10-minute listening exercise, right? And even in that short little bit, you realize, oh, wait, I wanted to say more. I wanted to talk too much. I wanted to, console too quickly. I wanted to tell my own story. I wanted to, there's all sorts of things that come up when we practice listening that we think we're pretty good at, right? So, to do that, I want you to invite with me up Carol King. Carol King is a licensed professional counselor. If you've been coming here to the COP, you've probably seen her up here before. She's a master facilitator and been in Europe leading equippings, been in the Middle East, been in Africa leading equippings. And so, Carol is great at writing skits, and so I have asked her to help write a skit. We're going to give you a skit, and then you're going to evaluate how Pastor Phil helps Carol. Do you want to give the introduction right there?
Narrate?
Yeah.
Okay. So let us give you a little bit of the background of this story. I'm Carol, and this is Pastor Phil.
Only for the next 2 minutes.
So Carol and her husband Jim have been attending Pastor Phil's church in the city for 10 years. Over time, Jim has become more involved at the church as he has had many opportunities to utilize his electrical skills to assist those in need. He has helped several individuals within his church and many in the surrounding community when they have encountered electrical problems in their homes. Due to limited finances, many of these individuals have shared that they do not know what they would have done without the help of Jim. There have been many occasions where Pastor Phil has spoken about Jim's servanthood and how he's a great example of what it means to love your neighbor. Carol has often been approached at church and within the community by those expressing appreciation for her husband. So Pastor Phil was surprised to get a phone call from Carol asking him to meet with her about some difficulties in her marriage. They meet at Pastor Phil's office.
Carol, nice to meet you. Glad to have you here. It's good to see you. How you doing? You know, I think the last time we talked, I think it was at that community banquet where Jim was getting the award, right? Wasn't that where we talked last? Yeah, he sure has done a lot for our town. It's been amazing. But you said you wanted to talk about your marriage. I was a little surprised that you wanted to talk about your marriage. So I'm sure we can sort out whatever difficulties you have. What brought you here?
Well, I'm not really sure where to begin.
Well, is this about the kids? Because, you know, I know that can be challenging. Or I know you have a new job, too, and I'm wondering, you're working full-time, right? I bet that's really an adjustment for you, too.
Yes, it is.
Wow. I can see in your face things you're looking, but they can't be that bad, right? You don't have to look away. It's okay. You can make eye contact with me. I'm sure we can sort it out. I don't remember you being shy.
Well, you have to know this is just really hard for me. I'm not sure how to say it. You know, I do have this new friend from work, and she's been encouraging me to come and speak to you. She thinks I need to share what has been happening in my marriage, but I don't really know.
Well, if you've been able to talk to this new friend, we surely should be able to talk very easily. And I can listen to what she said and help you evaluate whether she's telling you the truth or not. You know, sometimes friends, they don't always give you the best advice.
Well, I want to say that Jim hasn't been kind to me.
What? What was that, Carol? Are you talking about Jim? Can it be? Maybe it's been a little bit hard since you've been back to work, and I'm sure he's got more responsibilities now at home. Maybe, you know, that can make us more impatient when things like that happen with each other, so.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have come.
No, really, we can help. You can tell me. What is it?
Well, you know, Jim, he yells, he calls me names, he tells me I can no longer go to work or leave the home unless it's work or if I'm only going to church.
Wow, really? I am surprised to hear this. I really keep coming back. I wonder if this has to do with something about the changes now that you're working more. It's probably harder for you to be attentive to him. I wonder if there's a few things we can talk about that you could change to make that a little bit better. You know, I'm thinking, how about I give him a call, you know?
No, please don't do that. If you call him.
We're all friends here. This is family, you know? What would happen if I called him? I'm sure we can work out this misunderstanding, can't we? We can meet together and sit together and talk about these things. We'll find a way, right? Come on, really. She really wants to be done. I don't understand why. You're clapping for her courage. What I would like, do we have some mics out there? Great. One of the things that I want you to do, first at your tables, so just before the mics come out, I want you to take a moment at your tables and evaluate what are some of the agendas, the goals, the attitudes, the behaviors that Pastor Phil is showing that's revealed in his way of listening. Now, of course, we made it a little bit of hyperbole, but unfortunately, it's not enough hyperbole. Some of these things have happened. These are not so far-fetched. So, take a moment at your tables and discuss what are some of those competing values that you might see bubbling up in Pastor Phil that led to this kind of conversation. We're really only going to give you a few minutes, so talk quick. We'll come back, and you can hang up here until. Okay. Okay. We're priming the pump here to think about some of the, but can I just have like 2 or 3 of you raise your hand? We have to get a mic to you. What were some of the competing values that you saw? No hands, no values, no behaviors. Different question. Okay, here. We have competing mics.
So we were talking about how the pastor he really minimized what was going on. He didn't want to step into an often very messy, difficult, uncomfortable, strong emotion, heavy laden situation.
Yes.
He wanted to, I'm sure we can sort this out in the 15 minutes we have.
Yes. So he was very efficient and optimistic, right?
Our table had a good discussion, not on the topic, but it was good, so I'll just tell you what
So
it
you'll
was.
tell us anyway.
It's on the general topic. And that is, in Baraka's presentation, it said there are signs of abusers. And yet this Jim, the pastor, when you were playing that awful pastor, Phil, you didn't notice any of the signs. And so our discussion was, do abusers always have signs? I mean, if you have your eyes open, can you see them? Or are some of them so incredibly masterful at their manipulation that really, you really don't know? And so it's very hard to believe the wife who's telling you something that sounds ridiculous.
Both are true. There are signs and there are masterful people. So, one more.
We didn't completely talk about this, but it's also the culture of the church. If there's a controlling culture, then those signs wouldn't be obvious because they're accepted signs.
Right. And notice one thing, that Pastor Phil is actually expressing some of those same cultural things. He may not be an abusive person per se, but he's expressing and delivering some of the same sorts of controls, right? Look at some of these competing goals and values on the slide up here. Well, obviously divorce is bad, so we're against that. How do we navigate that with protecting the victim? Notice which values sometimes get more airplay, right, in Pastor Phil. Well, you know, the wisdom of Solomon, that means Solomon had to come up with this great plan and figure out exactly who's telling the truth. And we really highlight that in our church leaders. And yet, what if we actually just listen to the person in front of us, what they're telling us? Well, everybody sins. So obviously we need to talk about Carol's sin here because she's a sinner too. Right? But some sins actually have greater impact and consequences on them. Notice how those would shape the conversation differently depending on which side of these things you are on. Everyone's responsible for their own behavior, yet some sins are the results of other people's behavior. We might want to focus on Carol. If she's talking to me, I might want to focus on her problems because Jim's not in the room yet. That seems right, and yet then I'm making it seem like she's the problem, right? And that she could be causing it. We would never want to take church members to court and start accusing them. But notice here that Pastor Phil didn't have any consideration for what legal possibilities there might be at play here in submitting to government authorities. Because guess what? It's not just Carol, but are there children in the home? And could there be things happening in the home that might be reportable to the governing authorities? You will notice that attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, values can compete here and make it difficult for us to respond well. Even though all of us are against abuse, all of us want to see victims have healing, it can bleed into the way we listen, right? And affect the conversation. So how about we give Pastor Phil a second shot at listening in a better way? Come on in. Can I get you some water or tea, coffee, anything?
Water?
Okay. Thanks. That's all I have, so good. I know it can be hard to come in and talk about these things. I know you said you wanted to talk about something in your marriage. Is there anything you need in order to make it a little easier? Like, would you like someone else to be here with you?
Thank you for offering. I think I'll be okay with meeting with you now.
I know you said that you were having some problems in your marriage. What happened?
Well, I'm really not sure where to begin.
Yeah. It can be hard to start talking about problems, especially when we haven't talked about them yet. You can maybe find yourself embarrassed or afraid, but take your time.
Well, there was an argument last week. You know, this is really hard, and I'm not sure how to say it. My friend from work, you know, I'm working, and she's been saying I need to really just let you know what's going on in my marriage, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had a friend to talk to. And I'm happy to hear. I know it may be hard for you, but I would like to hear what's going on. Tell me more if you can.
Well, it's Jim. He gets angry, and he's not been kind to me.
I'm sorry. That sounds difficult.
I know this is hard to believe. It's hard for me to believe. Sometimes he can be so thoughtful. I think Jimmy just must be having a bad day. His work is stressful. Well, but you know, so maybe, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have come to talk. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize, Carol. It's okay. Tell me as much as you're able to tell me what's happening. If you need to take a break, if you want to invite somebody else, I want this to be a place where you feel like you can tell what you need to tell me.
I don't think I was expecting to hear that. I know you think a lot about Jim. I was afraid you would want to talk to him, and you know, I'm not really sure he thinks he needs any help. He tells me that our problems are because of me, because of the things that I do not do right. He really hates that I've begun working.
Sounds like things are getting pretty heated.
Well, yeah, he yells, he calls me names, he can throw things.
Carol, has he hurt you?
Not physically.
But other ways?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways that these kinds of things can hurt us. Tell me more.
Well, I'm feeling scared, anxious,
Yeah.
alone. I don't know what to do.
Well, you're doing one of the first things you need to do, and that is to find people you can tell. It's really hard to do this. It takes a lot of courage. I just need to tell you, it's never okay for someone to do this to another person and to blame them for it. We're responsible for our own actions, and so whatever Jim is doing is Jim's responsibility. It cannot be yours.
I'm not sure how to hear that. He just has told me so much that I need to change and I need to do things differently. You know, I mean, okay, you're saying these things, but maybe I just need to do what he asks me to do, you know, try a little harder.
Yeah. Carol, you will be the best judge of whether you're trying. I imagine you are. But it doesn't change the fact that Jim is still responsible for Jim. And that whatever he is saying, doing, in word or action, is coming out of his own heart, not out of you. Sounds like this has been going on for a while.
Yes. I'm shocked, though. I mean, thank you. I'm not sure what else to say.
Well, you don't need to say anything else, but I like to start making a plan on how we can help keep you safe and find someone that you can talk to, like a counselor, about this. Okay? Okay, so better listening. What, again at your tables, what attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, goals, things, what's different? What's present? So talk quickly at your tables. What did you notice? your conversations. We'll take 3 volunteers who are willing to quickly say what better listening, better attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, goals did you see? Maybe weren't the best yet. Pastor Phil's working on that, but, you know, better. Anybody got a hand up that we can? It wasn't better, apparently.
We mentioned that he gave her freedom, he affirmed her, he provided non-anxious presence, safety, he gave clarity about responsibility, he was safe and non-threatening, and listened well.
Oh, excellent. Comprehensive list. Anybody have something they want to add that's different? Right here. Wait, Emilia. Right here. Yes, you have to have a mic.
You know, I think that Pastor Phil went through, participated to a healing group.
He learned something, yes. One in the back there is Brian.
He asked the hard question that she didn't probably want to say. Has he hurt you?
Yeah. And didn't limit it to just physical harm, right? Do we have one more mic here, and then we'll move to the next slide.
Whatever his previous experience had been with Jim, he didn't let that drive his attitude toward what was going on. He kept that completely out, and it was her. She was the one that said, well, you probably can't believe this. I don't even believe this. But at least Pastor Phil didn't. You know, he created that safety for her to get it out.
Good, yeah, excellent. Thank you. So, obviously, there's lots of things that we can do, and Baraka already pointed to some of these things, but the first thing that we're doing, right, is beginning to recognize our own agenda in these conversations. Pastor Phil's first agenda, the first Pastor Phil's agenda, really created an unsafe environment. His agenda and his values on the second one created a little bit more openness for her to be able to tell. But Pastor Phil is never going to be enough for the solution. Carol will need more around her than just one person, right? So making relationships with professionals, knowing the law, knowing that there are hidden patterns, and so Jim can look wonderful in many parts of his life and still have this problem, right? Being able to listen to victims in the past, people who were victims at one point, who have found some healing, to find out what was most beneficial in their healing trajectory, right? To find out what helped them and also what harmed them, what wasn't helpful. These are ways we can learn. Not assume that because we are in a position of leadership that we are then therefore have all the wisdom that we need to know, right? We can examine the scriptures and see the repetition about caring well for the most vulnerable people. You know, the scriptures often talk about the widow, the orphan, right? The foreigner. But these categories are people who have no power or less power. And so this fits very much with those who are also experiencing abuse in the home. We can also do one amazing thing, and that is repent when we have done it wrong. Do you know that many times victims of other abuses are watching us, and they are noticing when we have made mistakes and when we are willing to repent? During the break here, Dr. Hill reminded me to talk about that all of these things plus ongoing care are necessary. In our impact research, we have looked at different kinds of trauma and how people who have experienced those traumas go through healing groups and what kind of healing they receive. So we assess people before they went through a healing group and equipping, then immediately after, and then some months after. All of the traumas, except one, we see progress where people are continuing to find healing even at time 2, except one. At time 3, at time 2 and time 3, except one, and that is domestic abuse. We see immediate improvement and then drop off. These are folks who go to a healing group or an equipping and then go home. They step back into environments where they may not know how to respond and may continue. So if you are ministering to people who have experienced domestic abuse and begun to tell their story, don't assume that all the healing that you see in the healing group will continue at the same rate. We don't have time for this, but I would love for you to consider this. What if Pastor Phil goes to speak to Jim with Carol's permission? What would that look like? How would that conversation be? What values, attitudes, goals, and behaviors would guide you with Jim? Someone who you do respect and have respected and can see the value he brings to the community. And also who has this problem. Right? This is also a difficult conversation and requires thought and practice before we do it. For some recommendations, if you want to explore more, I encourage you to look this up. Go to dianelangberg.com. This is Dr. Langberg's website. And she has a blog, and you can, and a number of many other resources. Some are available for free, video, audio, downloads, other things you can purchase. But this is a free resource. It's short. It's just a couple of pages. 13 recommendations for church leaders who are dealing with abuse that's happening amongst their parishioners, within the families, within the church. If you're looking for some other resources, these are just 3. The first one is A Cry for Justice. Jeff Crippen is a pastor who's helped write this book. Leslie Vernick is a counselor and an author who's written on emotionally destructive marriages. And then the last one's hard to read there, but it's by Basil Chavidjian. Sounds like religion, but Chavidjian. Boz is the founder and director of something called Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in Christian Environments. And if you're looking for a resource for your church, you could use this small one. He also has a book that's a whole guide for how Christian organizations would handle allegations of abuse, the policies and procedures they would have as well. Yes, and Diane reminds us, netgrace.org is his website, netgrace.org. Yeah, you want to ask or?
Yeah, I want to ask, is Haya here? Haya, are you here anywhere? Yes, could you come just for a moment, if you indulge us? I was very interested. We worked on a version of trauma healing, which we've entitled Finding Comfort in God. And one of the things we did was trying to adjust the trauma healing the wounds of trauma for people from a Muslim background who still accept going to a Christian, a Bible-based group. When we got to the lesson on domestic abuse, we really had to, with Lana Haddad's help and Haya's, we had to make some serious adjustments. And I think it's the case of many places in the world where the situation for women is a little bit more constraining. Could you just say really quickly, like, some of the changes that we had to make?
Hello, everyone. So as you may know, some of you, that the region that we live in, domestic abuse is one of the biggest challenges that we face when we deal with families. It's a shame, concentrated culture. It's all about honor and shame, so hiding and pretending that everything's okay is the main goal for families. So it's very hard to get the women to come and to speak up about what they're going through. Abuse, it's a male-dominated culture, so abuse is something that's very, prevailing. It's very difficult to get the women to feel safe enough to talk about the abuse. They get afraid to share in front of each other, so within a group context, it has to be women who don't know each other. They get afraid to show that the context that they live in may not be perfect because they get judged. And so a lot of the women face, as globally, they face verbal, they face sexual abuse, they face judgment for, wanting to live life as a normal person, wanting to work. So it's very complicated, and especially within the refugee context that we live in, because people come to a place where they are not at home, and they come with all of their domestic issues, and it gets only worse and more tangled because they don't only have to live with their destroyed relationships, but they have to live in a culture where it's they don't own anything, they can't do anything, and the families have to live with each other 24/7 because the men don't go to work anymore, so they have to, they kind of blow it all out on the women. And so it's very sensitive, it's very critical, and so it's been a wild ride to actually find out how we can get the women to feel safe enough to share about what they go through in the houses. I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess the part that really surprised me is in that lesson, it's more about how to minimize the damage and the pain in the home, because for many women, the idea of getting out of the situation is just not on the table. It's really not there. So thank you.
Thank you, Haya. Thank you, Haya. Thank you, Harriet. These are complex issues, not easily solved. A little bit of listening is not going to end the problem. We, though, the largest network in the world of the church, have possibilities to have influence. But it requires that we have serious, honest conversations about them, right? If you have facilitated the domestic abuse lesson, you know that it generates lots of questions. So we actually have 6 or 7 minutes before break. It can generate questions here. So we have a question up here. You can pose these through Menti. We have mic runners as well. I do not assume that I have the answers, but we have other people in the room who may have the answers. But what kinds of questions does this session from Baraka and from ourselves generate for you today as you think about providing trauma healing ministry in your community? So how can we talk with the other part of the story? You want to answer? I think Ray wants to answer that.
I'm thinking of a particular situation where terrible domestic abuse is going on, but what really sparked it and brought it out was the victim, in that case, had done something horrible, which he could have been criminally prosecuted for, and the partner jumped all over that and has since then tried to destroy her. So how do you sort out what the abuser in the home is doing versus the results of the other person's pain that brought this situation up initially?
I'm following. I'm trying to follow. These stories tend to be very complicated, right? And we often like our pictures to be one person is completely guilty, one person is completely innocent. In real life, that's not the case usually. There are still, Jim in this story is still responsible for Jim. There is nothing actually that Carol can do to cause Jim to bubble up and do this. Maybe some of you have seen this activity we've done, bumping, and Diane alluded to this, sort of bumping the cup. And so we've taken water bottles, and you can take the top off, and if you bump my elbow and water comes out, I can say, what caused water come? You bumping my elbow? No, water in the cup is the only reason. Because if it's empty and you bump me, nothing is ever going to come out. So this is just a good way to help illustrate. It's what's inside us that determines what's going to come out, not the edge. So that's not a great answer for you, but it is, we have to separate these two things so that when we're talking to Jim, we are really focusing on Jim, how are you responding to this? What's coming out of you? What does that reveal in you, right? You can think of maybe the good and bad listening for Jim as well. This is this question that's been posed. How do we talk to Jim? A bad listening could look like I come to Jim and I accuse him left and right? I come to him and I tell him that he's done everything wrong and I want to get in his face and rebuke him. And I have actually seen church leaders do this in a way that actually puts the Carols of the world at greater risk. We cannot defeat power with power. Oh, wait, you can't speak without a microphone, so somebody find Dr. Langberg a microphone. She's having as we say in our practice, she's having a feeling and she'd like to share.
Well, the other part of this is that abusers can be extremely dangerous to the people who come to talk to them. Absolutely. So I've known pastors who, a woman comes forward, he's beating me, she's all marked up, everything else. They get in the car and they go to the house, and the guy's got guns. He can end up dead. So I think that also has to be managed in ways that even if you've been told this much, you really don't know how bad it is. And that you have to be wise, not only about how you approach this person, but protect yourself and protect the person who came forward after you leave this person. Right. It's very complicated.
So, and somebody come over to Thaddeus in a second. I'll take a question from you. But wisdom is really important here. It's not just where you do this, but even your attitudes and your desire to help. See, Jim is also in need of help. He's somebody that you have compassion for and that you want to see find freedom. So you bring those attitudes even as you're asking him to tell his side of the story. But you're also aware of the subtle ways that people can minimize what they're doing, that they can blame shift, excuse, and you're looking for a way in to find his heart, right?
Yeah. What I want is, how do you address the challenge whereby, because the session on domestic abuse, you are addressing it from the context of healing group in terms of helping either the abuse victims or the abusers to experience healing from the heart wounds. But how do you as a facilitator balance so that you don't move into activism or creating awareness, because it brings it a challenge whereby you are trying to advocate, to bring the aspect of advocating for the rights of the victims at the same time when you are supposed to help. Because in the context where you work, it becomes a challenge. In the context of handling the lesson, how do you balance in terms of focusing on the goal of helping the abuse victim instead of moving to the other side of advocating for the rights of the victims?
I will maybe push back on that a little bit. I actually think we are called to do both of those things and that we can do them well. Now, advocacy, here's where when I am working with a victim, my advocacy should not be so strong that I am pushing the victim to do things that they're not ready to do, even if I think it would be in their best interest for them to do it. But I think I can talk about what these things could be while giving Carol the freedom, in this case, to make her own choices on how she wants to move next. Advocacy, though, from Pastor Phil's point of view, is preaching a sermon on this, is talking about why abuse is antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that when we find it, we need to call it what it is, address it, root it out. and that in submitting to our governing authorities, we want to utilize all of the things that God has given us, including the law, to help bring justice to places of injustice. So, we have just run out of our time, but I'm sure there's more questions that can come forward. I want to end this time here, but encourage you to talk on coffee break about this, about what is being done in your communities, both for advocacy, also for helping victims and helping those who maybe have been victims but now are abusers as well. Okay, we've come to the end of the morning session, and it's time to go on break. I want to remind you that we'll be splitting up at 11 o'clock into our 3 groups again. You know who you are, where you're supposed to be now. You're experts at this, right? We will come back, of course, and have lunch together after that. Have a second breakout after lunch. In that one, remember, organizational leaders, you're not going to Bethany, but you are staying here with the experience track for the whole session. Okay? Any other announcements that we need to make before we break? We're all good? Yes, that's then.